Okay, let's do this. All right. So a couple of days ago, on May 7th, 2025, the Department of Defense admitted in writing, finally, that the COVID shot mandate was unlawful, or at least that the implementation of the mandate was unlawful. So we're going to talk about that in a moment. We'll look at the actual memo so we can see it in writing. But let's take a moment and review how we got here. So, Inauguration Day, January 20th, President Trump, in his speech, says he would offer reinstatement and back pay. You guys remember that? He mentions that, but he never called the mandate unlawful. 1 week later, on January 27th, the executive order was published to the same effect. Again, there's all this language in there characterizing the mandate as, bad, but there's no specific characterization of the mandate being unlawful or illegal. Between then and now, or May 7th, a couple of days ago, there were all these memos that were published by the Department of Defense. And again, they would use all this language to talk about how bad the mandate was, but they would stop short of referring to it as unlawful. So until May 7th, it was never in writing anywhere. And there were I don't even know how many various memos, some of which I've covered in videos, that were published by the Department of Defense. So there were several chances they had to call this unlawful, and they did not, which I think was deliberate. Now, there was a memo that was published in which the Secretary of Defense referred to the vaccine as being experimental, but he does not use the word unlawful. Okay. But again, just setting the stage as to how we got here. On April 23rd, 2025, so a couple of weeks ago, in a video, the Secretary of Defense did use the word unlawful twice in a short video verbally. But until May 7th, we did not get the word unlawful in writing. So again, all right, so President Trump, Inauguration Day speech, then the executive order, then a series of memos that come out from the Department of Defense. The word unlawful is never used. The word experimental is used by the Secretary of Defense in reference to the vaccine. Then on April 23rd, 2025, in a video, Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth said something like, "We all know that the previous administration issued unlawful orders on mandatory vaccines, on an experimental vaccine, COVID-19. You know it, we know it." Okay, he said something like that. And then later in the video, and the video is only like 2 minutes and 42 seconds long. It's a short video. But later in the video, he once again reiterates that the previous administration's unlawful vaccine mandate. Okay, so is it good that he used the word unlawful in this video and he did it twice? It was clearly deliberate. Yeah, very good. Was it an admission? Yes. So a pivotal moment for sure. Now, I did not like the mitigating language that he used. So first of all, he blames it on the previous administration more than once. It makes it clear that it was the previous administration. And you might say, yeah, but the mandate did occur during the previous administration. Fair enough, but I'm just pointing out the fact that he tries to make that abundantly clear. He wants to distance himself and he wants to distance the current administration from the mandate. However, then why did it take 3 months for them to even admit it verbally in a video? Why not come out on day one, or at least in the first memos that were produced? But multiple memos were produced and they never used the word unlawful. So they had multiple opportunities to do so. And I would say if they were producing these memos in February and March with this guidance about the reinstatement and back pay policy, and they did not use the word unlawful, it was because they were deliberate in their decision to not use the word unlawful. That's me. That's an assumption, but I think it's a fairly valid one. Okay. But also the other thing he did in this video on April 23rd is he very smugly states, "We all know that the previous administration issued unlawful orders on mandatory vaccines, on an experimental vaccine, COVID-19. We all know. You know it, we know it." That's what he says. We all know. And then he says, "You know it, we know it." Well, hold on. Again, if we all know, why did it take 3 months for the Department of Defense to admit this. And again, that was a verbal admission, April 23rd, 2025. Now, curiously, on the same day, several hours after that video went out on Twitter or X, another memo comes out from the Department of Defense. And interestingly enough, the word unlawful is not in that memo. So he said it's unlawful in a video, says it verbally. A couple hours later, an official memo comes out. The word unlawful, not in there. So a lot of people, myself included, were like, well, are you or are you not going to admit that it was unlawful? You've already said it verbally. Are you going to put it in writing? So regardless of how we got here, on May 7th, 2025, so what is that, 2 days ago, a memo did come out. It's in there. And we're going to take a look at that. So let's do that now. So let's. Okay. So here is the memo, and we're going to go through, we're going to read this. We are not going to read every word, but it's a short memo, so we will read some of it. So, okay. So let's see. Office of the Undersecretary of Defense, memorandum for secretaries of the military department. So the military departments are like Department of the Army, Department of the Navy, etc. Subject, supplemental guidance to the military department discharge review boards and boards for correction of military/naval records, considering requests from service members adversely impacted by coronavirus 2019 vaccination requirements. All right, and there's a whole slew of references here that we're not going to go through, at least not yet. Okay, on January 27, 2025, the president issued reference A. All right, let's just look up here what reference A is. Reference A, the executive order from January 27, 2025. Okay, that's the original executive order that came out a week after inauguration. All right, on January 27, 2025, the president issued reference A. That was his executive order concerning the Department of Defense's since rescinded coronavirus disease 2019, COVID-19 vaccination mandate, which was unlawful as implemented. Now, this highlighting here is mine. Okay. Which was unlawful as implemented. So for the first time in writing, Department of Defense has acknowledged the mandate was unlawful and an unfair and overbroad and completely unnecessary burden on service members. The Secretary of Defense has taken decisive action to execute the president's guidance to correct this injustice. 1, all former service members discharged solely for refusing to receive the COVID-19 vaccine may pursue reinstatement in the military, all right, and be considered for eligibility to receive back pay. Now, that's not new. That came out in the initial guidance. All right, as part of this potential reinstatement policy, what happens? If you were kicked out of the military against your will and you want to come back in, you may be eligible for back pay. All right, 2, former service members who attest that they voluntarily left the military or allowed their service to lapse according to appropriate procedures due to the military's previous COVID-19 vaccination mandate may pursue a return to military service. No mention here of eligibility for back pay. Why? Because you don't get any. If you were kicked out against your will, maybe we'll give you some back pay. If you left voluntarily, despite the fact that the mandate was unlawful, no back pay for you. And remember, that group is about 10 times as large as the previous group. You know, how many people were kicked out? About 8,600. How many people left in total due to the mandate? Again, the estimates are anywhere from like 80K to 100K. So 10 times as large as those who were kicked out against their will. Okay, great. We've talked about this in previous videos. In addition, some service members were separated with less than a fully honorable discharge characterization for their refusal to take a COVID-19 vaccine, depriving them of veterans' benefits. Very true. Other service members who remained in service and requested religious, administrative, or medical accommodations related to the COVID-19 vaccine requirement may still have adverse information in their records connected to those requests. Also true. To remedy these harms, on April 23rd, 2025, the secretary, so that date is the day that that video came out that I told you about, where he, at least the Secretary of Defense, verbally said it was unlawful. And he said he was going to order the department to put out updated guidance. So that's what they're referring to. To remedy these harms, on April 23rd, 2025, the Secretary of Defense directed the Undersecretary of Defense for Personnel and Readiness to issue additional guidance to the military department review boards concerning the review of requests from service members and former service members adversely impacted by the COVID-19 vaccine mandate. I hereby direct the following. So who is I? I is this guy down here, Jules Hurst, Jules W. Hurst III, performing the duties of the Undersecretary of Defense for Personnel and Readiness. So I hereby direct the following. The secretaries of the military departments will, through their boards for correction of military naval records, continue to apply the guidance contained within reference B. All right, what's reference B? Office of the Undersecretary of Defense for Personnel and Readiness Memorandum, updated guidance on correction of military records for service members involuntarily separated, dated April 1st, 2025. Okay, so what he's saying is the secretaries of the military departments will continue to apply the guidance contained in, the published memo from April 1st. Which my office issued to facilitate the reinstatement or return of eligible individuals who wish to continue their military service. Okay. Next, within 15 calendar days of the date of this memorandum, which was dated the 7th, so what would that be, like the 22nd? So within 15 calendar days of the date of this memorandum, the secretaries of the military departments will rescind references C, D, and E. What are those? Okay, C is a memorandum from the Assistant Secretary of the Air Force for Manpower and Reserve Affairs. D is a memorandum from the Assistant Secretary of the Army for Manpower and Reserve Affairs. And E is a memo from the Assistant Secretary of the Navy for Manpower and Reserve Affairs. So what is he saying here? You have 15 days from the 7th of May. So you have until May 22nd to rescind within the various departments, this memo that gave guidance. Okay. So basically what you're going to do is you're going to rescind that guidance and you're going to replace it with this new guidance. Okay. So rescind references C, D, and E, previous memos that the various departments put out, and distribute the attached guidance to their discharge review boards in their place. So we're about to look at what will replace this rescinded guidance. The BCMNRs, so the Board of Correction of Military and Naval Records, should carefully consider claims by individuals who filed formal requests for administrative or medical accommodation, including requests for religious accommodation related to the department's previous COVID-19 vaccine mandate, yet continue to serve. So this is referring to people who didn't necessarily get out of the military. They filed a request to not take the shot, like a medical accommodation request or a religious accommodation request. That's the type of people that we're referring to with this bullet. Adverse actions in a service member's records solely associated with their refusal to take a COVID-19 vaccination or seek an exemption from that vaccine mandate should be removed. Okay, so if you have some sort of derogatory paperwork in your file because you didn't take the shot, or because you sought an exemption to not take the shot, that derogatory paperwork should be removed from your file. This guidance is not intended to interfere with or impede the Board of Corrections' statutory independence, nor does it limit the boards from considering additional claims related to harms caused by the department's previous COVID-19 vaccine mandate and providing appropriate remedies. Okay. So again, this memo was signed by Jules W. Hurst III, performing the duties of the Undersecretary of Defense for Personnel and Readiness. All right, so what's the attached guidance? Supplemental guidance to the Military Department Discharge Review Boards and Boards for Correction of Military/Naval Records, considering requests from service members adversely impacted by the mandate. All right, so this gets a little bit tricky, but we're going to try to make sense of this. So again, this is updated guidance. This is, if we're going to view this charitably, and I don't really view the Department of Defense very charitably. Like, I don't think any of this is necessarily a good faith move, but maybe you disagree, and that's fine. But I do think that there are people within the Department of Defense that probably are trying to do the right thing, for sure. Okay, so what's this attached guidance? Supplemental guidance to the military department, discharge review boards. Okay, so generally, it says, 1, the requirement that service members receive a COVID-19 vaccine without an adequate due process mechanism for vaccine accommodations was an injustice. 2, this document provides clarifying guidance to discharge review boards and boards for correction of records, considering requests from present or former service members to correct records when such present or former service members, A, were involuntarily separated based solely on their refusal to receive the COVID-19 vaccine, and who submit discharge upgrade requests pursuant to that separation. All right, so here's what's going on. We're giving guidance for these review boards to potentially correct the records of service members or veterans. So who could this apply to? People who are involuntarily separated for one reason and one reason only, because they did not take the COVID shot. They refused to take the shot. So that's kind of the group of people mentioned in subparagraph A. And of course, who submit requests to have their discharge upgraded. Okay, so like if you did not receive, you were kicked out, you did not receive an honorable discharge, and now you request to have your discharge status upgraded, that's who this is referring to. Subparagraph B, submitted a request for administrative or medical accommodation for exemption from the COVID-19 vaccine mandate and request correction of service records containing adverse information or reflecting adverse action. All right, what does this mean? You were in the military. The mandate came out for the shot. You didn't want to take the shot. You submitted a request. It could have been a medical exemption request. It could have been a religious exemption request, but you submitted some type of request. But you've got some sort of derogatory paperwork in your file. So that's what this is referring to. And then subparagraph C, suffered additional harms or injustices not specifically addressed within this guidance that were solely related to a service member's refusal to receive the vaccine. If there's some other way in which you were impacted that is not specifically addressed here, this is broad language to try and cover that too. I think this is good. I mean, so far I like this. Okay. Discharge upgrade requests. Service members who were involuntarily separated solely for refusing to be vaccinated did not receive the same treatment across the department, meaning the Department of Defense. While some service members were assigned honorable discharge characterizations, others received general under honorable conditions characterization, and as a result, lost access to important educational benefits under the post 9/11 GI Bill, the Montgomery GI Bill, and potentially other veterans benefits. All right, what are we saying here? So people got kicked out for not taking the shot, but they all weren't necessarily treated the same as they got kicked out. Some were kicked out, they have an honorable discharge. Others did not get an honorable discharge, and because of that, may have lost access to benefits. To correct this injustice and enhance uniformity, so it's twofold. One, we think you were treated unfairly, but also you weren't even treated the same. To correct this injustice and enhance uniformity across the military services, the review boards should generally grant a discharge upgrade request from a former service member when the former service member was involuntarily separated. The separation was based solely on a refusal to receive the COVID-19 vaccine, and C, there are no aggravating factors in the service member's record, such as misconduct. What does that mean? You were kicked out for not taking the shot and only for not taking the shot, not because you didn't take the shot, but you also got a DUI. Okay, that's what they're trying to say here. If you got kicked out for taking the shot, and that is the only reason for which you got kicked out, there are no other reasons, such as misconduct, that's the group of people that we're talking about. What they're saying is the review boards should generally grant a discharge upgrade request. So if you're requesting to get your discharge status upgraded, then generally they should honor that request. All right, let me keep reading. Review boards should normally grant requests to upgrade the characterization of service to honorable, change the narrative reason for enlisted separation, and change the reentry code to an immediately eligible to reenter code under these specific circumstances. Officer records should be changed to have similar effect. All right, so we want to change it. We want to upgrade your status to honorable discharge and also make it eligible so that if you wanted to come back to serve again, you could. If an applicant's military records reflect multiple reasons for involuntary separation, i.e., when separation was not solely due to the fact that the former service member refused to receive the COVID-19 vaccine. So again, you didn't take the shot, but you also had a DUI, just to use that as an example. The review boards should apply existing policies that require the former service member to establish evidence of an error, impropriety, inequity, or injustice in their discharge in order to warrant relief. What does that mean? Okay, you got kicked out because you didn't take the shot, but also because you got a DUI or something that has nothing whatsoever to do with the shot. Then you still got to explain that, because you didn't just get kicked out because you didn't take the shot. So you still got to explain, and show, hey, I shouldn't have been kicked out and not received an honorable discharge for this other reason too. Okay. Removal of adverse actions and information solely associated with COVID-19 vaccine mandate. The department's COVID-19 vaccine mandate also caused harms that were not reflected on separation documents. True. There are impacts that were felt by people for reasons that did not necessarily make it onto their discharge paperwork. That's true. For instance, some service members received administrative letters of reprimand, like me, I did, negative or inconsistent evaluations. I also received an evaluation that told me I failed to obey a lawful order, which of course is not true because the order wasn't lawful. Let's see, what else does it say here? Or withholding of opportunities for reserve component personnel to perform inactive duty training for pay to achieve a good year for participation in retirement purposes. Okay, this is broad, but it's saying we admit that there are other ways in which people's careers were impacted. That's all very true. While previous guidance required the secretaries of the military departments to update service member personnel records to remove adverse actions solely associated with denials of requests for exemption from the COVID-19 vaccine mandate on religious, administrative, or medical grounds, this relief should not have been limited to service members who formally filed an exemption request. The inadequacy of the consideration afforded to those who submitted accommodation requests undermined the faith of many service members, and they should not be penalized for deciding not to request an exemption that had little or no likelihood of success. What does that all mean? They are saying, listen, we know that the military departments were approving such a tiny minority of exemption requests that so many people said this is a sham, and they therefore did not submit exemption requests because they knew there was an extremely high likelihood that they would just be rubber stamped disapproved. And that happened. So this is accurate. So what they're saying is, we have people here who would have normally submitted exemption requests, but they knew there was only a very, 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 very tiny chance that they would be approved. They said this is a sham, so they didn't even submit the request. That's what this is saying, and that is true. Like, it's a good acknowledgement. So this relief to correct these records can't just be extended to only those people who filed a request, because the process was so bad that a lot of people said, why would I even file the request? All right, I'm continue reading. To ensure that present and former service members are not penalized for pursuing religious and other exemptions to the COVID-19 vaccine mandate in good faith, the review boards will carefully consider applications by individuals who request correction of records containing adverse information or reflecting adverse action solely associated with the request for exemption from the vaccine mandate, or with appeals of denials of such requests. Additionally, any present or former service member who attests that they would have filed a request for exemption from the vaccine mandate were it not for the department's very high rate of disapproval of such requests shall be evaluated as if they had requested and been denied such an exemption. So what we're going to do is, if you tell us, if you attest that you were going to do you were going to put forth an exemption, but you didn't because you knew that the likelihood of it getting denied was so high, then if you will attest to that, then we will treat you as if you had submitted a request and it had been denied. Okay? So we're basically giving you credit for at least having submitted the request and then having had it denied. And because what they're saying is a lot of these we should not have denied, you know? If adverse information associated solely with the request for exemption from the vaccine mandate is found with an applicant's official military personnel file, the Board of Corrections should, as appropriate, exercise its broad discretion to assess the potential impact on the service member's career and correct impacted personnel records appropriately. So again, I like this. Exercise broad discretion. Listen, we are empowering these review boards with broad discretion in trying to correct these files. That's what this says. All right, last section here, then we'll be done with reading this. Other harms or injustices suffered by service members not specifically addressed in this guidance. Present and former service members may have suffered other harms from the vaccine mandate that are not specifically addressed in this guidance. Very true, and I'm glad that that is acknowledged here. Adverse action may include the overt withholding of favorable personnel actions, including such actions as removing individuals from approved lists to attend training or professional military education, to assume leadership positions, or to conduct a permanent change of station transfer on schedule. What they're saying is there are all these other ways that you may have been impacted by this mandate. You may have lost training opportunities. You may have lost opportunities for professional education. You were going to go receive a favorable assignment that you then lost out on because of your, you weren't vaccinated, or all these other reasons. And what they're saying is we acknowledge that those things happened. It's a good admission. Don't know how they're going to fix it all, but it's a good admission. Many service members may have been denied these opportunities while waiting for the adjudication of their administrative or medical exemption requests. Even more concerning, some have reported that they were pressured to voluntarily separate from the military due to their COVID-19 vaccine status, even while awaiting adjudication of their exemptions. What they're admitting there is they know that some people were told, because you're unvaccinated, you should just leave the military, while their exemption while their exemption requests were still being processed. So perhaps before it was even denied, people were being told, you're unvaccinated, there's the door. And that did happen. The Board of Corrections should exercise broad discretion in providing appropriate corrections to the records of service members and former service members who suffered harms resulting from the department's COVID-19 vaccine mandate. Okay, I agree with that. I agree with, them being empowered with broad discretion. I don't know how they're going to fix all this. I don't even necessarily believe that these are all being done in good faith. And I'm speaking from the perspective of the entire institution, not necessarily from individuals that may be trying to do the right thing. All right, there's one more thing that I want to read here. This is something that I put out today. And the reason that I put this out today is because these are some of my thoughts that I've had over the last couple of days in thinking about this latest guidance. And so I'm just going to read something that I put out today on Twitter. All right, so Here's what I wrote. I'm just going to read it because I've already put it out here in writing, so I already put my thoughts together. So rather than just, I might as well just read what I wrote a couple hours ago. DoD now admits in writing the COVID shot mandate's implementation was unlawful. There's also recently updated DoD guidance that better addresses points previously ignored. This is good. What I'm referring to is the memo that I just read. The mandate's unlawful nature means associated orders were also unlawful. So if the mandate's unlawful, orders associated with that mandate are also unlawful. That's what I'm saying. Yet, many careers were ruined, and this remains inadequately addressed. This is not good. What I'm saying here is, listen, I like the new guidance, but I'm not going to pretend that this goes nearly far enough. And I'm not going to, let DoD off the hook here. Oh, they're trying or whatever. No, not good enough. My personal case isn't any more important than what happened to anyone else and is merely an example of how severe the impacts were. I was relieved of battalion command for refusing to comply with the mandate that DoD now admits was unlawful. I was told that I failed to obey a lawful order. This was, of course, untrue. How many active duty Army battalion commanders had the courage to accept relief of command rather than comply with the mandate? Less than 1%. I'd imagine it was the same in the other services. What happened to the 99% who complied with the unlawful mandate? They were rewarded. Their careers progressed. Many have since been promoted. What happened to the less than 1% who actually adhered to the Army values? In my case, I was not rewarded. I was fired from command. I then resigned with 19 plus years of active service from a broken institution that I knew by its actions could not be trusted. I left with zero retirement, but with my integrity intact and oath to the Constitution unbroken. Let's assume I wanted to return to service. First, let's set aside that under current DoD guidance, I'd receive zero back pay and zero credit for the 32 months lost since I left the Army. Why am I entitled to no back pay or credit for lost time? Because I voluntarily resigned from an institution that demanded I violate my oath to the Constitution and break the law. According to current guidance, this means I and others like me don't merit back pay or credit for time lost because when backed into a legal corner, we voluntarily left. Second, let's set aside the fact I now question the loyalty and credibility of every single senior military leader because I've observed how they've acted the last 4 years. Let me say that again. Let's set aside the fact I now question the loyalty and credibility of every senior military leader because I've observed how they've acted the last 4 years. Setting those very important points aside, if I chose to return to service, how would my career progression even work moving forward? What about my lost command and subsequent career opportunities? How can this be accounted for when it isn't even being adequately addressed? The latest guidance does broadly mention other harms, such as lost career opportunities, but how will these be rectified? We must realize that these same impacts also apply to tens of thousands of other service members too. I'm only one of them. Admitting the mandate was unlawful is certainly a good step. Improvement in the current reinstatement guidance to cover areas previously ignored is also good. However, I remain unconvinced this truly shows a good faith effort on the part of DoD to make this right. Okay, what do I mean here in summation? What am I getting at? Am I glad that the mandate has been admitted as unlawful by the Department of Defense? Yes. Do I think that that needed to happen? Yes, of course. Of course, it should have happened a long time ago. And if you want to, blame the previous administration, okay, great, fine. then it should have happened on January 20th, where it should have happened as soon as the new Secretary of Defense was in his position. But it should have been admitted by both President Trump and the Secretary of Defense immediately. Why wait 3 months? What were you waiting for? Was it not unlawful 3 months ago? Of course it was, because it was the mandate was unlawful for the entire period of time in which it was in effect. It went into effect on August 24th, 2021. It was rescinded on January 10th, 2023. For that entire period of time that it was in effect, it was unlawful. So, yes, I like this updated guidance. No, I do not think it goes far enough. Do I think it's possible that this guidance, so like, how is it that I can say the guidance is good and that I appreciate the updated guidance, I appreciate the admission that it was unlawful, and yet still think that this is not a good faith effort on the part of DoD? Because I do not trust DoD. And again, I'm talking about the institution and the senior-most leaders of the institution and those who really pull the strings within the institution. DoD has been targeting the American people for a very, very long time. That's not going to change just with a change of who's in the Oval Office or even a change of who's in the senior most position of the Pentagon. It's not going to change. That's not the way this works. So do I think that there are good people, perhaps even some good people that are maybe even in some senior positions of DoD, some senior positions? Yes. But I think as a whole, the institution cannot be trusted for reasons that have been made manifest, very clearly over the last couple of years. But here's the thing, and this is my final note. These things can be done in a way that look to be good. And for many people, they will be good. So are there people who will maybe get their discharge statuses corrected? Yes. And for those people, this will be very, very good. Or people who decide they want to go back and they get their back pay. And for those people, I'm very, very happy. But this can also be a calculated maneuver on the part of DoD to make it look like we care about correcting this issue, all while reinforcing the fact that these guys over there were responsible for it happening in the first place. And you guys, in many of my videos, I talk about how, this very crafted dialectical tension between political parties and different administrations from different parties is the fuel that drives the destructive agenda forward. So no, I do not put much stock in, blaming the previous administration or whatever. So that's kind of how I reconcile those seemingly different ideas. So yes, I can be very happy that there was an admission that the mandate was unlawful. And I do think that we should press forward with that. No, I do not think that this means that, DoD is now, in the hands of the good guys. No, I don't think that at all. Or that the White House is in the hand of the good guys. Again, these things are done by way of calculated maneuvers, limited exposures that can look like they are victories for the people, but in reality are, calculated concessions, or that are done to continue to string people along. Okay, so it's possible that both of those are true at once. So anyway, we got to look at these things with some complexity and with some nuance. But overall, am I happy with this? Yeah, I am. I am happy. Let's not interpret it as being something more than it is. We've got to understand what actions are truly indicators of and what they're perhaps not necessarily indicators of. So anyway, all right. Hey, just wanted to share that with you guys. I know that some of that memo is still kind of fuzzy, but I do like they mentioned in there that it will allow the boards of corrections to exercise broad discretion. I like that because they're admitting that, hey, there are people whose discharge statuses need to be upgraded. There are people who submitted exemption requests and they were almost like blanket denied. There are people that didn't even submit exemption requests because they knew that they would be denied. So how do we take care of these people? And then there are other people that were affected in other ways that are hard to categorize. How do we take care of that? And I'm appreciative of the memo insofar as it does go, but I also totally acknowledge that none of this goes far enough. And if you wanted to do the right thing, you would have come into position with a plan already written, and you didn't. So anyway, all right. Hey, thanks. Appreciate it, guys.